Some of you know that on Thursday morning, right before Purim, we buried a good friend of mine, who many of you here, not that many of you, but a lot of you here knew, David Greenwald. And I've just been thinking so much about him since his passing on Tuesday, and hearing story after story after story at the funeral and at the gathering back at his house afterwards. He was a spiritual seeker par excellence. His whole life he just wanted to have conversations about spirituality, about who was God to him. And those of us who got to spend time with him towards the end of his life often had the feeling that he was getting close to an understanding of what that really might mean. And I, as a rabbi, obviously have been around death and dying a lot, and some of you for sure have also been around death and dying a lot, either in your professional lives or just because we all experience loss. And it's always different, but very often the actual moment is so beautiful. Amidst the grief and the pain of the loss, there is sometimes just such a radiant peace. And the people, I wasn't with Dave in his last moments, but the people who were just reflected how incredibly peaceful it was, and his face had such a radiant, tranquil look on it as he breathed his last breaths. I'm talking about that because there is this very, very profound section of the Torah that we read today, and it really touches on a lot of what the beautiful words that Rabbi Eva shared before the Haftorah about Eliyahu and about that hiddenness and presence, and how sometimes when we really feel that God's face is hidden, it's actually most present. And so this extraordinary moment in the Torah when Moshe says, I want to see you. I want to see you, God. What song is that from? I want to see you. What is that? George Harrison?
My sweet Lord. My sweet Lord.
I see you. Yeah. My sweet Lord. Right, that's exactly. That is what Moshe is saying to God in that moment. I want to see you. I want to know who you are. Like, I've just had this profound moment of like seeing my people who I've led out of Egypt commit the ultimate breach in that relationship with the sin of the golden calf. We've had this process of forgiveness, and now I want to see you. I want to know you. I want to see your face. And God's answer is just so powerful, and it's like it's one of the ultimate mysteries, really, of religion and of Judaism and of spirituality in all of its fullness and emptiness and hiddenness and revealedness, all of it. Because he says, first of all, nitzavta al atzor, like go into this rock, and then he says that nikret atzor, in this cleft of a rock, and then he says, I'm going to pass by you, but you're not going to see my face. He says, V'rayita et achorai, you'll see my back. Ufanai lo yeyau, but you're not going to see my face. This divine mystery. God says, I'm going to show you my back, but I'm not going to show you my face. Because early on he says, no one can see my face and live. So what does it mean to see God's back? It means a lot of things. There's a very famous midrash that says that actually God showed Moshe the knot in tefillin shel rosh. This image of God wearing tefillin, the boxes and straps that some of us put on every morning apart from Shabbat, and the tefillin shel rosh, the head tefillin, has a big knot in it that goes to the back of the head. And the midrash says, God showed Moshe the knot on the back of his tefillin. And you think, how can God wear tefillin, first of all, right? Does everyone think, how can God wear tefillin? I think But there's an incredibly deep commentary on that by the Mei HaShiloach, the Ishbitzer Rebbe, the Hasidic commentator, who says that tefillin, the language that he uses is so amazing, because he says, tefillin meramzim al devekut v'chibor, that tefillin is all about the idea of cleaving and closeness and connection to God. So in a way, there's this very intimate way in which God is showing Moshe something very intimate, but not God's face. And so there's a way in which there's a deepening of the connection. But there's more. Because what he goes on to say is that what God is showing Moshe is how God has been present in the past, but not in the present. Which theologically is really important to understand. Like sometimes the mystery of a moment cannot be revealed to us until years later. I'm sure we've all had experiences like that, where something has happened that has felt painful and random and ridiculous and strange, and then years later we're like, that happened because... And in a way that's God showing us God's back and not God's face. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs puts it like this. When he says, when God says, you cannot see my face, for no one can see me and live, humans can at best see my back. Even when God intervenes in history, we can only see this in retrospect, when we look back. And so, achorai, see my back, this image of it being God's tefillin, this image of it not being the full presence of God, because we can't see the full presence of God, but the image of it somehow being something that we have to piece together. And I think that's a profoundly important lesson for us. I've been given some strong messages recently to focus on spirituality and not politics. And I don't really want to talk about politics, but sometimes I can't help myself. But there's a way in which the world can feel so confusing and chaotic and painful, and we feel distraught sometimes. But I think really having faith, and our friend David Grunwald had a level of faith that I can only aspire to have in a tiny way. He believed that he was going into the divine embrace, into God's care, right? And faith is saying, like, I don't understand what this mess is all about right now, but like, I may not know until I'm facing my own death what's going on in this moment, because God doesn't reveal God's self in the present. God reveals God's self in the past. God lets us see God's back. Very powerful idea. And then the same midrash that talks about God showing Moshe the knot of God's of the tefillin says, Aval ata ro'eh ba'olam haba shenimshal. He says, when Moshe, it's almost like the midrash imagines Moshe saying, well, when am I going to see your face? And he says, samoch lemita, when you're close to your own death. Halamadata shehametim ro'im et hashchina. Because people, when they're close to death, or people when they've died, actually see the Shekhinah, which in this midrash means they are seeing the face of God. So when the Torah says, no one can see my face and live, it means at the point that we die, we are perhaps seeing God's face. And perhaps there is this divine bliss, and perhaps there's this ultimate connection, and perhaps there is this full understanding of everything that's been so confusing in life. And of course, those of us who've experienced loss, which is probably all of us, wish for our loved ones that they indeed have been kissed by the divine face, and that they have seen the divine face. And some of us maybe have experienced that in being around people when they're close to that end. But this idea, while we're living and please God, we should all live to 120. While we're living, we get to see God's back. We get to see God's back. And that, in a sense, is not a negative thing. It's not like a second best option. It's actually very powerful, because we don't necessarily want to see God in God's fullness. Some of us may feel like we've seen God's face when we've sort of taken psychedelics and we've sort of experienced that ultimate kind of oneness of everything. And there is a sense that perhaps that moment, that ultimate moment of death, is kind of like that, where everything, all of the duality, all of the ways in which everything feels separate and broken and discordant, all comes together in this kind of whole. But while we're in the land of the living, not on psychedelics, we get to see God's back. We get to see the back of God's tefillin. We get to have an intimate but not fully personal relationship with the divine, which means that the mystery is constantly unfolding itself. The mystery of God's tefillin, of the back of God's head, the mystery of being able to discover and work things out only with the gift of hindsight. And many of us have experienced, after someone's died, like all kinds of little signs and signals that indicate the continuing presence or the presence of that person. And I have one just now, which I shared with Bruce here, because on the page that talks about this midrash, where we get to see God's face, we get to see the Shekhinah when we die, this was the bookmark. And the bookmark is an image of a man called Uriel Baruch, who was at the Nova Festival, taken hostage, and on Shushan Purim, last Purim, on Shushan Purim, his family got the call that he was confirmed dead, and he'd been killed on the day of October 7th. But the family just made a series of these stickers, and Bruce is very close to the family, and I had an opportunity to go with Bruce. Myself and Rachel Amaru went with Bruce and sat with the family one evening, and they had just made all of these stickers about Uriel Baruch. And this one says, "Hachaim hem kumo Luna Park, v'nachnu olim al kol hamitkanim." Life is like a Luna Park, and we get to ascend on all of the different rides. And it's a picture of Uriel Baruch with angels' wings. And that just happened to be in the page that's talking about people seeing God's face at the moment that they die. So I hope that my friend Dave got to see God's face. I hope that Uriel Baruch got to see God's face. I hope that all of us who've experienced loss have the sense of our loved ones being at peace and being in that kind of divine embrace. And I hope that those of us who are still around, and God willing around for many, many years and decades, will have the opportunity to recognize that faith doesn't mean we have to have all of the answers now, and that sometimes seeing God's back is this idea that it's going to reveal itself, like Rabbi Eva talked about, this sort of revelation in the hiddenness, the craziness of Purim, the Hester Panim, the hidden face becomes revealed sometimes a lifetime later on, but that we can hold on to the fact that we can only understand a tiny fraction of what's going on in the world, and having faith and being able to sort of see God's glory is about being able to see God as God is passing us by, with the understanding that we might get to see one day a fuller understanding of the whole picture, and not just this tiny little bit of the picture that we see today. Shabbat Shalom.